Hello everyone, I'm Elmanita Yana. On this occasion, I would like to talk about racism. Among the 7.8 billion people on Earth, there must be many differences between them. Differences in race, religion, skin color, and many others. Of the many differences that exist, of course, there are some problems that arise, one of which is racism. Racism is the belief that groups of humans possesses different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. It may also mean prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against other people because they are of a different ethnicity. One of the racism incidents that has shocked the world is the murder of George Floyd. On May 25, 2020, George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, was murdered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States, while being arrested on suspicion of using a counterfeit $20 bill. During the arrest, Derek Chauvin, a white police officer with the Minneapolis Police Department, knelt on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds after he was handcuffed and lying face down. Two other police officers, J. Alexander Quang and Thomas Lane, assisted Chauvin in restraining Floyd. A fourth police officer, Tow Tao, prevented bystanders from interfering. While handcuffed and prior to being placed on the ground, Floyd had exhibited signs of anxiety and complained about being unable to breathe. After being restrained, he became more distressed, complaining of breathing difficulties and the knee on his neck, and expressing fear of imminent death. After several minutes, Floyd stopped speaking. For a further 2 minutes, he lay motionless, and Officer Quang found no pulse when urged to check. Despite this, Chauvin ignored pleas from bystanders to lift his knee until told to do so by paramedics. George Floyd's death caused a lot of protest in the world, especially in the United States. Thousands of Americans are taking to streets to protest about racism, many for the first time in their lives. Large protests occurred even in the midst of the pandemic in order to demand justice. And the Black Lives Matter protest this time seems more racial diverse, with larger number of white protesters and protesters from other ethnicities standing with black activists. Basically, it's been a long time since black people have been victims of racism, where white people have always held power and looked down on black people. Many cases of racism occur in the United States, but not least also incidents of racism against blacks in Indonesia, namely racism against Papuan people, where most of those who travel to Java Island feel disrespected by jokes and excessive treatment. Not only black people, Asians are also often victims of racism in the United States. As lately, there was a lot of hashtags Stop Asian Hate, where it has been widely known that not a few Asians living in the United States are treated less well. Stop Asian Hate is the name of several anti-Asian violence rallies that have been held across the United States in 2021 in response to racism against Asian Americans. Many of these rallies occurred in the wake of a series of shootings, three Atlanta space, that killed 8 people, 6 of whom are Asian women. The COVID-19 pandemic, which was first reported in the city of Wuhan, Hubei, China, has led to an increased amount of racism against Asians and Asian Americans. A Pew Research study found that 58% of Asian Americans believed that racist views had increased towards them during the pandemic. On March 16, 2021, a series of mass shootings occurred at three spaces in the Atlanta metropolitan area. Although the shooter has not been charged with a hate crime, some commentators have characterized it as such. As of the 8 people were killed, 6 were Asian women. It was enough to provoke public anger, especially Asian people, that caused protest. From Atlanta to New Zealand, protests to end racism against Asians have taken place in the cities across the globe in response to the Atlanta spa shootings and the rise in hate crimes against the Asian community. Attacks on Asians in 60 of America's largest cities soared by an unprecedented 165% during the first quarter of 2021, continuing a spike that had been sparked by the coronavirus pandemic last year, police data show. The dramatic increase follows a similar spike in the major United States cities last year and come as the administration of President Joe Biden has taken steps to curb the violence that activists say was partly fueled by former President Donald Trump's inflammatory rhetoric about the virus's China origins. The United States House of Representatives is taking up legislation passed by the Senate last week that would create a new Justice Department position dedicated to tackling the problem. The police data compiled by the Center of the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino, and provided to VOA show that police department investigated a total of 95 attacks on Asian Americans in 60 of the most populous cities in the country during the first quarter of this year, up from 36 during the first quarter of 2020. The 16 cities studied by the center, which include New York and Los Angeles, the country's two most populous, account for about 8% of the United States population. In the FBI's latest hate crime data for the United States as a whole, the same 16 cities accounted for more than 21% of all hate crimes in 2019. Between March 2020 and February 2021, Stop AAPI Hate, an initiative support Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities led by several Asian American advocacy groups and the Asian American Studies Department of San Francisco State University reported nearly 3,080 anti-Asian hate incidents in the U.S. Asian Americans have been physically attacked, verbally harassed, spat upon, and subjected to racial slurs. In February, an 84-year-old Thai man died after he was shoved to the ground in Oakland, California's Chinatown. Since the start of the pandemic, Asian Americans have become the target of xenophobic attacks, much like Muslims were blamed and scapegoated after the 9/11 attacks. By the time the Black Lives Matter movement erupted after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis last year, and this year's anti-Asian hate crimes sparked a new round of rallies. There was no question they would be speaking out together for justice. African Americans and Asian Americans are reaching out across past tensions to present a multiracial front to the violence of the last 2 years. From acts of friendship like one and campers to joint rallies across the country. Basically, racism is not something to be proud of because there's no benefit that we can get other than the division of society. We, as human beings, also definitely need the help of others, so that we should appreciate the differences that exist, so that we can create a peaceful and prosperous life. I think that's enough from me. If there is an error, please be excused. Thank you and see you.